So a few weeks ago, I dropped the common vocal tuning mistakes video. I shed some light on some common errors that a lot of people make when it comes to tuning vocals using things like AutoTune, Melodyne, WavesTune, etc. And I hope that if you watched it, you got some value out of it. But if you were like a lot of the other people that watched, you were curious about how exactly should you be approaching vocal tuning step by step. What does the actual process look like if you do so correctly, quote unquote? And I say it like that because there's obviously a lot of different ways to tune vocals, but what I wanted to do in today's video is break down how I approach tuning vocals using tools like AutoTune Artist and Melodyne's Melodyne. So if you want to find out how to do this in your own setups, this is the perfect video for you. Are you ready? Let's go. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? This is your boy, 5-Piece producer and engineer extraordinaire. Thank you for checking out today's video. We're really going to talk all about how I approach vocal tuning using a variety of plugins such as Antares AutoTune and Melodyne's Melodyne. Now, while I am using these plugins, I don't want you to worry. What I am going to be showing you is not necessarily specific to these plugins, and I will suggest some alternatives or other ways you can incorporate what I am saying in your own setup. But with that in mind, I do want to point one thing out on this session. This video in itself is going to help anybody that wants to learn how to tune vocals regardless of genre. However, the example that I'm using here is literally a freestyle that I did the other day where I just put up the mic, put on AutoTune, and just went ham, you know? That means it may not necessarily be indicative of a final product. It may not necessarily make sense. There might be some gibberish and weird stuff happening in it. I don't really want y'all to criticize or judge me too much on the song choice here. It's not really about the song. It's about what we are doing. And while it is a melodic rap song with some heavy tuning on purpose, everything I'm teaching you in this video is going to be applicable whether you want to achieve a very noticeably hard tune sound or if you want it to be a lot more transparent. Maybe you're a pop or a country singer that wants to just make sure your voice is in key. This will still help you folks at home. But with that in mind, let's jump onto Pro Tools here and actually talk about what's going on in my session and how I approach tuning step by step. So the first step of the process is we're going to identify the key or the scale of the instrumental that the vocalist is singing on. And this is just to ensure that they're actually singing or being corrected to the right notes that make sense with the instrumental, right? The instrumental is really what's guiding or dictating what notes or keys or pitches can be played and will make musical sense in the context of the whole song. Hopefully this adds up. But there's a few ways to do this. I mean, you could do this old school, which is what I used to do, which is I used to cue up a piano sound and I would play with the instrumental until I figured out exactly what notes worked in the key, and then I would either reverse engineer and figure out what scale they pertain to, or I would just bypass them on an AutoTune plugin. The latter is not always the best. This is not a foolproof method, and I actually don't really advise this unless you have no other choice. Instead, what I recommend is you use an automatic detection plugin. So one thing that I like to use is Antares Auto Key plugin, and this plugin will literally listen to the instrumental, determine the key, and then you could ultimately send this to the AutoTune plugin that you have in your session, or you could just manually map it yourself. But either way, it makes this process essentially foolproof. It'll usually get the key right on the nose, and then you could proceed with doing these next steps. Now, if you don't have this plugin, and if you're not willing to spend the $50 to get it, which I highly recommend you do because it just makes life so much easier, you could usually find a couple of free alternatives. I believe there's one out there called Key Finder. I'm not too sure if it's still supported. It is a freeware, so you know, you get what you pay for in that regard, but there is other plugins out there that will do this for you. I think Mixed in Key is another one as well. I like using this, so let's do that real quick. I'm going to play just a section of the instrumental. It's ultimately going to determine what the key is, and then we're going to send that to our AutoTune. So let's do that real quick. So I let it play a little bit longer, obviously, because I want to make sure that it's getting the right key. You saw that it was B flat major first, and then it switched back over to D minor. It's not a glitch or anything. It's just obviously listening to what's happening. It's seeing which notes are being played. And as a song progresses, more notes may come and go, and it might be more indicative of what the actual key is. But with that in mind, we've now figured out that the key of the beat is D minor, and that's what we're ultimately going to want to set our AutoTune as. So we could send it to our AutoTune, and it should automatically do that. And once we've done that, we can actually open up the tune and just make sure. And you can see here I got my AutoTune plugin directly on my vocal, right? And notice how it's in the second slot of the channel strip, okay? There's a reason for this. We're going to talk about it in the upcoming steps, but all we need to make sure right now is that the key and scale are lined up correctly. And this is going to lead us into the second step of the process, which is we're going to want to adjust the AutoTune settings for our vocal. And there's a few specific settings we're going to want to address, and depending on your tuning plugin, whether you're using AutoTune or something else, you may obviously have some different parameters to play with, but really we're going to be focusing on the retune speed, the input type, and the tracking, right? Our scale is obviously set up correctly. It's been mapped, so we don't have to worry about that. But obviously, if you're manually doing this, if you don't have access to an auto key plugin like what I just did, that will take care of this for you. You're going to want to manually set this up, right? But assuming that's done, we're really just focused on input type, retune speed, and tracking, okay? Let's talk about the first thing here, which is input type. You're going to want to set this based on the type of singer and their tonality of their voice, right? So as an example, male vocalists, they usually have slightly deeper voices. Their voices occupy a specific tonal range. You're going to want to go for an alto or tenor, that's what this is, setting. That's what the input type should be set to. However, if you're working with someone who is a female vocalist and they have a bit of a higher range, they're singing in a higher range, maybe even falsetto, you may want to go for the soprano. Even a male vocalist, if they're singing in a higher range, you'd go for soprano. But I find that these are the two main settings that you're going to use for most vocalists, and it's going to ultimately just determine how sensitive this auto-tune works, how it ends up, tuning the vocal specifically, right? It's going to react to this type of tonality a specific way, and that's why we want to set it up in advance. Now, the other features you could use, bass instrument and instrument, these are more applicable to actual instrument sounds. Or low male, that's if you have like a really deep low voice, like a Barry White, you know what I mean? You may want to consider using that. Again, these are just different algorithms that'll help the tuner work better and more suited to that voice that you're recording or tuning after the fact. So in my case, I got a male vocal, it's me, so I'm going to set it to alto tenor. The next thing is you may want to adjust the tracking depending on the vocal. I'm going to be honest, I usually leave this at 50. However, if you have noise or if the vocal performance is very much all over the place, there's a lot of pitchiness going on. So, certain vocalists are like that. This is becoming more of a trend as well in the music scene, especially in the hip-hop scene where there's rappers that have really squeaky voices that go all over the place. You know what I mean? That in those situations, you may want to up the tracking so that it's a little bit more sensitive in particular and not always grabbing and tuning everything. Or you may want to relax it. And if you relax it by going to the left, it might actually, tune a little bit more, right? It all depends on the vocalist. It's important to change this or address this if you do have a less than ideal vocalist or a less than ideal vocal recording that has some noise or other things on it, maybe like a live off the floor recording as an example. Now, the final parameter that I would adjust is the retune speed. Now, I'm not really going to talk about flex tune, vibrato, or humanize. I don't actually use these a whole lot personally, and if you want to play with them, feel free, but I'm not really going to go into them. I'm really focusing on how I actually approach tuning, and I use the retune speed always, right? This is going to be the main thing that really drives the track and the amount of tuning that's going to take place. Now, me, I have this set to 0, and this is actually where I like it because this is intended to be a heavy tune sound. You're really going to hear the presence of the auto-tune, the roboticness of the vocal, right? These are things that are going to happen. But as I relax this, as I go to the left, what's going to happen is it's going to not tune it as aggressively. And what that might do is it might let through some of the problems, right? It's not going to heavily correct things, so things may still be slightly off key. And that might not be ideal if I haven't sang things the best, right? And me personally, I sang into the auto-tune. So sometimes when you're singing into auto-tune, you're purposely singing off. And the way that you sing off ultimately creates the effect that you want, right? That's why if you hear some of these rappers and their stuff leaks and it's the untuned vocals, it sounds terrible. And I know it sounds terrible, but again, it's because the way that they're singing into it is what you get out of it at the same time. And they're doing it messed up on purpose to ultimately achieve that effect. Now, if you're somebody who's singing like legitimately you're a great singer and you really don't want to have that vocal presence, that vocal tuned presence, I should say, you're going to want to obviously be more on the left side here and relax the tuning. Maybe it's easier if I just show you. So let me play a little bit of this track, and I'm going to just adjust the retune speed. I'm going to be honest, I'm not going to go beyond 12 o'clock because this is scary stuff here. You're not going to want to hear that. But probably up to here, you're going to start to notice that things really soften and weaken, and the tune sound is not as noticeable. There's still some tuning taking place, but not enough to make it, you know, that heavy tune sound that I'm talking about. It'll sound more natural and transparent, really. So check this out.
I want me, I want her. She don't know what's in store for her and for me. I know what we can be, and I don't know what we really get into. But I know that I want you, yeah, I know that I want you. And these days, yeah, you know, these women come and go. I keep them on the low, it's so despicable.
So I'm really exposing myself there, both lyrically and with the way that this retune speed is set up. As you see when I'm going down here, you're starting to hear, you know, the cracks or the blemishes, the problems, right? Where I'm not necessarily singing things perfectly or really in key at all. And you're hearing that, right? It might be a little jarring at times. Really all depends on the performance and how you set this up. But in either way, all you really got to understand is, you know, the faster the retune speed, 0 in this case, the heavier the tune, the more robotic or T-Pain like it's going to sound like. The more to the left or the slower the retune speed, the more natural and transparent. So you're obviously going to want to set this based on what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to achieve a natural sounding pop song or country song or rock song where you don't want that tune sound, you're going to be on the left. But if you're making like a T-Pain or a melodic kind of rap song, you might be more on the right. It's all going to be about what you want to get out of it. Before I continue with the next step, I want to say if you're getting value out of this video, if you like what you're seeing, if you're learning something new, please smash that like button so that this video can reach other people like yourself and help them in the process. And at the same time, if you're new here, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. I drop a new piece of content every single week, always focused on helping you sound better and helping you make more money with your music. I'd love to help you with these areas, but all you got to do is pay the small fee. Subscribe to the channel so you can see my content when it goes live. Now, with that in mind, let's keep talking about the next step here when it comes to vocal tuning. So the next step is we're actually going to use Melodyne to manually tune and pitch correct vocals. But the thing is, we're actually going to put the Melodyne ahead of the AutoTune. I know you might be thinking, well, why the hell would you do that? Well, what we're doing is we're actually first setting up the AutoTune on that second channel to get the general idea of what the tuned vocal is going to sound like. This is going to do like 80 to 90% of the work. But the thing is, depending on how you sang the vocal, the AutoTune is going to react to that, right? So if I sang something and I wanted to, let's say, hit a G, but I'm singing it and it's right between F and G, maybe on F sharp as an example, it's going to maybe not tune it up to G. It might actually take it, and if I'm closer to F, it's going to pull it down to F. So the only way to fix issues like this without creating a whole lot of problems is to manually grab these moments that are not going the direction that I want and place them onto the right key. And that's exactly what I'm using this Melodyne for. So the Melodyne is almost like a little bit of a safety net or a small adjuster where I'm just able to change the course of where that pitch is so that AutoTune can then take it and slam dunk it. You know what I mean? Shaq and Kobe, baby. So let's get into this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my Melodyne here, and I've already tracked part of the vocal. And you can see here it's showing all the different, you know, notes that I'm singing, right? And I could take them and right? But the thing is, I'm actually going to want to be a little bit more conservative here. I'm not necessarily going to want to move everything. The AutoTune is already doing a lot of that. And because I'm putting this in here, things are going to seem worse than they are because this is first in the chain. So this is actually showing me my entirely untuned vocal performance, right? It's not showing me what happens after the fact, after the AutoTune. However, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to play through this and listen and try to identify where there are specific problems. So where stuff is really rubbing the wrong way, where maybe the AutoTune is overcorrecting, it's going too far, or maybe it's creating too much of a tuned sound, right? So I'm just going to play this through and just identify a few moments and show you how we're going to fix them.
I want me, I want her. She don't know what's in store for her and for me. I know what we can be.
So like here, this area is a little bit problematic, right? It's a little bit wiggly, you can kind of tell.
I know what we can be.
What we can be. Like the can be especially is a little wiggly, right? So what I could do is I can click on any of these notes, and you'll see here it's going to show me the note, and it's going to show me how many cents it's off by, right? And if you want to achieve like a natural sound, you're not going to want to correct it right to 0. You know, 0 would be like it's perfectly on the key, right? You're actually probably going to want to stay more in like that 10, -10 to -15, or +10, +15. So it's slightly off, feels slightly natural, and that's cool. But in this case, my AutoTune is set heavy, right? It's hard tuning it due to the retune speed. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to actually probably want to hard tune this as well. So that way there's no mistake in it. The AutoTune is just automatically going to correct it to the note that I want, because it's probably going to do that anyways. However, if you got a slower retune speed on your AutoTune, you can get away with not having this be perfectly on key. And again, it's better to have it not perfectly on if you want a more natural type of sound, usually, right? So with that in mind, again, I'm going to now just take these and put them pretty much right on the grid. I could just click and type in 0, and it should essentially correct them perfectly. And you can see some of these are a little messed up, right? A flat, it's like -36. That's quite a bit of a gap between the note it's supposed to be on. And as you can see, it's kind of in between notes when it's like this, right? It's between G flat and G, this one, right? So I'm just going to put it perfectly on. And as I do this, I'm going to now be able to listen again and identify if it still sounds off. And if it does, I'm going to now want to manually move the note to a different note.
I know what we can be.
See how weird that sounds?
I know what we can be.
Also sounds weird.
I know what we can be.
So obviously this is the right note. You know, it's still got some problems. We're not done here yet. But you can see how I'm now taking this and putting it onto the right key.
I know what we can be.
All right. So now that we've done that, what you're going to want to do is, of course, take this and apply it to every single part of the vocal in your track, right? Every single vocal that you want to have soon, you're going to do this for. And this is painstaking, detailed work, but it is worth it because it will make your vocal sound very flush and natural if you do this correctly, as I'm suggesting. Now, with that in mind, we're going to go into the final step, which is we're going to go in and address pitch modulation, vibrato, and other problems that come up within the vocal tuning. And I'm still going to be using Melodyne for this, but if you haven't figured it out yet, you don't need to use Melodyne. You really just need to use any tuning plugin that has access to a graph mode. And by doing that, you should be able to control these same parameters. I just find Melodyne does this very easily. Now, with that in mind, what I'm going to do is this particular area that I identified before can be, right? I'm going to zoom in on that. And from there, I'm going to want to enter my pitch modulation tool. What this is going to do is it's going to allow me to address these peaks that you see, right? This is sort of how my voice is moving as I perform, because I'm going up and down, and sometimes I'm saying a note, but then I'm going up, right? Now, you're going to see it's going to be able to flatten and smooth this to a degree. I know it's a little bit jarring, I apologize, but that's just how this plugin is. So now I've completely flattened it. You do see though that it hasn't flattened this part because this is on a next note, but let's just see what this sounds like.
I know what we can be.
Now I'm going to be honest, it's too much, right? I'm doing this on purpose to show you what things shouldn't sound like or what you don't want. I think a part of the problem is this other note, right? There's still this peak here. Even if I address this, the peak is still there, as you see. So what I'm going to actually want to do is I'm going to go in, I'm going to go to the note separation tool, and I'll click right around here because that's where the note goes back to a flat kind of position. And now I can actually take this piece, which has now been separated, and you can see it has its own pitch. It's actually on A, 20 cents up. I'll take it, I'll put it back to where it's supposed to be on G. I'll bring it down to 0, and now this is all flush. Let's see what this sounds like.
Know what we can be.
All right, it's a little bit weird. We're still going to fix it, but you see how I've already done a few steps to start to improve this. So let me go back to my pitch modulation.
Know what we can be.
So I actually think it's fine here, but I think this is the problem. So I'm going to take this and bring it down.
Know what we can be. And I know what we can be.
Now that seems to smooth things out, but again, you may want to consider going in deeper, seeing if you could separate those and smooth those even better, or maybe again, just re-recording the entire performance to achieve what you actually want, because a lot of this is dependent on what you record in the first place, and it is better to have it, you know, perform the best that it can be, have it be as close as what you want as you can have it, so that way you save yourself all this work on the back end. But overall, I've walked you through these main steps. And just to summarize one more time, you're going to start by identifying the key of the beat or the scale of the beat. I like using a plugin like AutoKey from Antares to do that for me, but you can also do this manually in a bunch of different ways. From there, you're going to actually want to go to your vocal track. You're going to want to put on your AutoTune or your automatic tuning plugin, and you're going to want to dial in some settings such as your input type. Make sure that the scale and the key, of course, makes sense. You're going to want to do the retune speed to achieve the exact reaction to the material, right? To get the tuned reaction, whether you want it to be transparent or a much more noticeable sound, and then potentially even addressing the tracking. You can even take it a step further and look at these other settings, but again, these are not things that I always play with. I'm usually focused more and mostly on the retune speed. Now from there, what you're going to want to do is you're actually going to want to put a graph editor plugin, such as Melodyne, for example, ahead of the AutoTune, so that way you can actually manually move specific notes and sort of tune into the AutoTune. It's like, again, this extra step that just creates a little bit more control and certainty in what the AutoTune is going to do. And once you've done that, by moving the pitches around, you're going to also be able to take this up another notch by going in and addressing the pitch modulation, drawing out any vibrato or any issues on that front to smooth out the vocal performance. So hopefully that makes sense. This is the way that I tune vocals using Terry's AutoTune and Celemoni's Melodyne, but again, you could swap these out for whatever plugin you like. Some tracks are easier to tune than others. Some don't require as many steps. Some require even more steps and even more detail. Really all depends on the track that you're dealing with, but I really encourage you to watch that common vocal tuning mistakes video if you haven't done so already. I'll leave a link to it in the description below because it'll probably point out some things that you're falling short on, if any. Now, if you haven't done so already, please smash that like button. It would mean a lot to me and it would help other people see this video. And if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the channel. I drop a new piece of content every single week, always focused on helping you sound better and helping you make more money with your music. All I ask is that you subscribe to the channel so I can continue helping you on your journey. Appreciate y'all for watching. You want to see anything in a future video, leave it in the comments below, and I'll see you later. Peace.
5